I wanted to take the first moment to to say thank you to everyone that participated in the film. Our beloved Thich Nhat Hanh, Sister Chen Kong, the Plum Village community, our team, Laura Hassler, her family. It really took a village to make this movie, of people working together in Austria, but also around the world in different countries. Wanted to also take a moment to thank the Finnish crew that contacted us and joined us from seeing a post on Facebook, and for the audience members that will participate, please feel free to ask whatever questions after we make our initial introductions. If you have any questions regarding or any of the panel, any questions regarding the background of the film, how it came together. Laura Hassler is a treasure trove. She is a library of information and has the most direct experience working with Thich Nhat Hanh and Sister Chen Kong, a lot of the people who were involved in the film project. So and also one of my heroines, one of my heroes. So I like to start with Laura introducing herself, and then with Anthony Nicotera introducing the Fellowship for Reconciliation, the interconnections between Thich Nhat Hanh and the work that they're doing, and then we'll proceed on. So, thank you. So, Laura.
Thank you so much, Gregory. I'm not sure how I can live up to your description, but hello, everybody who's joined. My name is Laura Hassler. I am one of the children of Alfred Hassler and Dorothy Hassler, indeed. Both of my parents worked for many years for the Fellowship of Reconciliation. My dad was first the editor and publisher, head of publishing, they called it. These days you'd call it head of communications. My mother was membership secretary. My father later became executive secretary. And I think he worked for the FOR for something like 35 years, from the 1940s, early 1940s, until his retirement in 1974. And one of the things that he did was he introduced Thich Nhat Hanh into the FOR. He met Thich Nhat Hanh in 1965, I believe, when he led an interreligious team, a fact-finding team to South Vietnam, and they met their representatives of the Buddhist movement, which was the main, a very large nonviolent movement working against the war and to try to help relieve the suffering of ordinary people. And when Thich Nhat Hanh visited the United States a year later, as a guest professor, I think at Cornell University, my father prevailed on him to stay and to tour the United States and speak about the war. And he did that, and that was the beginning of a 10-year-long, very close collaboration. And sort of in the midst of that period, I got pulled in. I had just graduated from college, and they needed somebody to go to Vietnam on a kind of I called it a Buddhist spy mission, to collect signatures for a campaign for a ceasefire. My dad couldn't get in anymore, so he asked me to go, and I did. And that then there was a successful mission, but an unsuccessful attempt for a ceasefire, unfortunately. But that led to my ending up working in Thich Nhat Hanh and Cao Nhạc Phung, later Sister Chan Kong, in their office for a year in Paris. So I lived in that community for a year. And then I went back to the United States and I set up a representative office for them at the FOR headquarters, which I ran for a couple of years. So that's kind of me. I'm also a musician, and the kind of the background as a peace activist and my work as a musician interested in music from many different cultures led about 23 years ago to starting Musicians Without Borders. And that's my work now. It's an organization that brings music to places where people have suffered the impact of war and also of forced migration. So we're working in many former conflict regions and also some present ones, such as Palestine, for example, and also with refugees around the world. So that's me relevant to this conversation. Thanks very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Laura. Anthony, before you start, I wanted to take a moment to say hello to Here Kitty Studios, to Tor and Kat. I'm getting goosebumps now. They are a super badass couple that's been doing sound recordings for Hollywood films and TV and television. They worked on Breaking Bad. Kat's father is a peace activist, was a peace activist, sorry. He passed away. And they generously, donated a bunch of their time and worked with us to produce the sounds and the soundtrack for the film. So, hello. So, Anthony, you're up.
Thanks so much, Greg. Such a privilege to be with you all again. My name is Anthony Nicotera. I have the privilege of having taught and then learned from Gregory. So Gregory was a student in one of my first peace and justice courses in Chicago when I started teaching peace, justice, and nonviolent peacemaking courses and social work courses, which I still do here in the New York City area in the United States at NYU and Seton Hall University. And I've been affiliated with the Fellowship of Reconciliation in one form or another since the early 1990s as well. But Greg, as a student in my very first course, had studied with and spent time with Thich Nhat Hanh, and I was teaching one of Thich Nhat Hanh's books called Love in Action. And so really, Greg, in many ways, co-taught with me a lot of that course, and then invited me to be a part of this wonderful collaboration, the Five Powers Revolution, as an executive producer and partner. And it's been a labor of love for over 10 years, as Greg said, with so many people who have contributed so much of their time and energy and effort. It's a privilege too to have served on the National Council of the Fellowship of Reconciliation as well. And I see Lori here as one of our National Council chairs previously, and also on the board of one of our other affiliates with the Fellowship of Reconciliation. And I just am so grateful for the legacy that is FOR. Lori posted in the chat that Reverend Dr. Emma Jordan Simpson, our narrator, she was our most recent executive director, and she also greatly supported the film. This is an FOR story, and it's a story about the Thich Nhat Hanh Plum Village community and that extended network and Sangha that is global in so many ways. And it was really, as Laura just shared, Alfred's leadership and invitation and friendship that helped make that all happen. And in fact, we were so very grateful in the US because it was in no small part as a result of that friendship that Dr. King in 1967 here at Riverside Church in New York spoke out, we think, very powerfully and prophetically against the Vietnam War, because in no small part, again, of the relationship with the Fellowship of Reconciliation and Thich Nhat Hanh. And he named the triple evils of racism, militarism, and poverty that we need to, and we continue to try to work to confront those in the US and internationally through the I4 International Fellowship of Reconciliation, which Greg worked with. In fact, he was working with them when he started this project. So I just want to say thank you again. I'm going to say also one more word. We tested this earlier. The singing bowl is something that's been significant. Unfortunately, it just doesn't resonate well when we invite the singing bowl over Zoom. So I'm not going to do that, but just to share a moment about how the singing bowl has been a part of this story. Thich Nhat Hanh introduced me to the singing bowl. I now use it in every class that I teach, and I've used it with young people who are gang involved here in the US, who are, involved with violence. I've used it with young children. I've used it at conferences and with adults and students. And it always seems to invite some centering. It's a reminder from Thich Nhat Hanh as we invite the singing bowl, and maybe you can do so in your imagination or your mind's eye, and maybe some of you use a singing bowl, or there's some great apps. One I like to use is called Insight Timer, and you invite the singing bowl, and it's just a call to be present fully in the moment. And maybe in a moment, we'll just take a moment to do that with paying attention to breath, body. But that invitation, as Thich Nhat Hanh would say, is when you invite the singing bowl, it's the voice of our ancestors calling us home to our deepest truth in the present moment. The voice of our ancestors calling us home to our deepest truth in the present moment. And so grateful for that connection across time and of our ancestors, and so many like Alfred and Sister Chen Kong and Thich Nhat Hanh, who continue to be presente, we say in Latin America, right? Present with us. They continue, as Thich Nhat Hanh would say, even in this moment, in and through our work. And Thich Nhat Hanh also said that we should replace the verb to be with the verb to interbe, because it's not that we are, but rather we inter are. We cannot exist outside of relationship one with the other. And that's not just a metaphysical notion, but also scientific notion, in as much as matter is neither lost nor gained in the universe. We're comprised of the same matter somehow, and we, in that sense, need each other. So when he was, asked if he was from the North or the South, because he would have to be, taking sides during the Vietnam War, to either be from the North and a communist sympathizer, or the South, a US sympathizer, he said, I'm from the center. I'm from the center, because we inter-are. And therefore, he also reminds us that when we invite the singing bowl, it is an invitation to awaken from our illusion of separateness. It's an invitation to awaken from our illusion of separateness. So maybe just now, as we inter-are in this moment, and I know I'm so grateful for each of you, and for this film, and for FOR, and for Alfred, and for Sister Chen Kong and Thich Nhat Hanh and the Plum Village community, and so many who've labored in love and continue to labor in love to do the work of peace and justice and building a beloved community. Maybe we can just take a deep breath and pause at the top and slowly exhale, and just be here now without judgment, just for 30 seconds of centering. Maybe again, imagining that singing bowl. And I'll just close by doing what Thich Nhat Hanh had always done for us whenever we were in his presence, and that is to bow to the beauty in each of you. One might say the divine in each of you, and to know we inter-are, and to thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Brother Anthony. So I want to take a moment to introduce our Finnish panel and guests. I'm going to just give a tiny overview, and then I'd like them to actually explain what they're doing. So, and please excuse me if I mispronounce, if I do not get your names perfectly, but I'm going to do my best. So, Timo Kuusiola. Did I get it right? Is the one who initially contacted me via Facebook. He is started and runs an NGO that deals with social good and environmental issues that are also interconnected to nonviolence and mindfulness. That's that's Timo, and he'll explain more about himself. And then we have Eunice, who was one of the was the assistant who worked with, or the teammate that worked with Timo on the translation, the Finnish translation. So thank you, Eunice. And we have Matleena Käppi. Is that close? I'm sorry?
Käppi.
Käppi. Okay, Matleena Käppi, who is works with social issues. She's a youth politician. She's running for parliament, and she can explain the issues that she's working on. An amazing Finnish group. And then we have Timo Virtala. Did I get it right? Yay! Timo Virtala, who is who works in nonviolent activism. Timo introduced me to the Finnish group. It's been a genuine pleasure to work with them. Kind of brothers from another mother, sisters from another mother. We've met virtually and worked together for months now, and it's been a great honor. So what I'd like you to do, is to introduce yourselves, and then I actually have a question prepared for the Finnish group after you introduce yourselves. So the question I have is, what are the challenges of being social, environmental, and anti-war activist in Finland right now with the threat with war going on in Ukraine, Finland joining NATO, and the possibility of a nuclear catastrophe on your doorstep? So thank you.
Okay, maybe I will start. My name is Timo Kuusiola. I'm from Creatura Think and Do Tank. So we are an NGO which works for systemic approach, and we are. My background is in environmental issues. I've been working for environment and climate issues for about 10 years in different in the different cities, and for now 5 years in different NGOs. And we are currently trying to like a systemic approach that is combining how to combine social justice and climate issues, and then non-violent issues, and so it's a kind of a, because, and my background was also in, I've done Buddhism in the Plum Village community. So all of the like the problems are it's interconnected. So that's where it's really difficult to try to put it in words in short way. But we are doing political influencing, and then we are in many cooperation things that we are doing, projects that we are doing at the moment, and I will explain more, and I think we will go now the other panelists, and then we will ask, and we will give the answer. So would Matleena.
Yes, thank you. So I'm Matleena Käppi. I am a local politician here based in Jyväskylä, central Finland. So I'm a member of the city council with Left Alliance Party. I'm 26 years old. I study biology, and one of my major interests are environmental issues. biodiversity loss and climate change, and how our economic system and the whole society must be transformed in order to be sustainable. I have earlier I worked with sustainability research network Wisdom here in the University of Jyväskylä. I was managing a project on donut economics. And now I'm currently focusing on politics. I'm for equality, LGBTQ rights, mental health care, human rights, etc. Yeah, that's the social part there. I think that's about me. How about Timo Virtala?
Thank you, Matleena, and thank you everybody who made the movie. And this is a great honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me here. I have written 2 books, one about nonviolence, the power of nonviolence. There is 20 examples of successful campaigns of nonviolence from different parts of the world, from different times. And my first book was about Sarajevo. And besides those books, I have been teaching 20 years nonviolence in a civil service center. Here in Finland, we have obligatory military service, but the guys who refuse to go to army, they do 1 year social work for schools and hospitals and health centers and places like that, libraries. And before that, they have 4 weeks training here in Lapinjärvi area where I live. And I have been teaching them about Mohandas Gandhi and Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela and Rosa Parks and etc. I'm a member of many peace organizations. For example, Peace Union Finland, which is part of International Peace Bureau. And Jonas, ole hyvä.
So I'm Jonas Autio, also from Central Finland, Jyväskylä, and I have been going to like meditations that Timo has been doing here in Jyväskylä. So one time we were like discussing that he is doing these subtitles, and I told that I have had done some subtitles, and I said that I can help, and then that's how I got into this. And like I have been like into like mindfulness and like spiritual practice, and I'm interested in like doing something for like all these climate change and all the issues in the world. So I also like joined the Creatura, like I'm not in the not like fully in the Creatura, but I'm like interested to also help that something if I can do. And yeah, I'm very happy that I could help with this project, because this is something area that I'm interested, and this is something I think it's really good. So thank you.
And as a Finnish speaker, I can say that the subtitles were really great. So you did a good job.
Should we now go to the answering the question about the Ukrainian war? Actually, I was the one who wanted to bring it up, that question, because I think in the springtime I felt the atmosphere in Finland, how it got really intense, and I have been looking like the teaching of Thich Nhat Hanh before, and also I have read quite many books, and there is many times that there is a story about the Vietnam War, how difficult it was be in the middle of the war with taking no sides. So I think in also here when I participated in discussions, and if I try to understand like other side, like Putin, then I'm Putinist. I think it comes from Buddhism. For me, it's a perfect understanding. Like every side should be like the understanding is the key for trying to make peace. So I think that has been a key issue for me and learning to how to try to understand, but it's been really difficult in that because the fear in Finland society was so intense in the time. So I think that's something I noticed.
I think that the Finnish peace movement have had some disappointments lately. Firstly, Finland is now using excessive amounts of money for fighter planes, and we have sent a joining application for the military alliance NATO, as you heard, and I'm pretty sure that this will mean diminished probabilities for nuclear weapons disarmament in the world, although it doesn't have nuclear weapons, but are we going to be able to do something about it once we are with NATO? And also it might increase the power of war industry. So it all seems that the NATO application decision was made in a kind of a collective fear for Russia and the hostile actions that it is making. And of course, I understand that point of view, but I'm really worried about the future when it comes to the war industry power and nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons is, I think, one most pressing issue for the whole humanity that we should tackle.
There is many types of peace work, demonstrations for peace, for example, and there the peace movement is agreeing with the majority of Finns right now in many issues, that of course we all want peace, and we all want that international law is respected, and international law should be developed more. It has failed, that it didn't work here, and we want to help Ukrainians, and we want to say that this was unacceptable behavior from Russia, leadership of Russia, what they did. Many things peace movement is agreeing with the majority of Finnish people and politicians and media. Then there's issues of NATO and giving weapons or selling weapons to Ukraine that are more sensitive and or type of questions peace movement is disagreeing with the majority of Finland. But this is only one type of peace activism, the demonstrations and social media peace work. Then there's of course negotiations, peace negotiations, but what my organizations mostly do is this kind of the work that is made during the peacetime to prevent war, to promote international organization and international law, and why not business and tourism also, or any type of interaction between nations and different type of people. Many faces, many people wanted to know what peace activists have now to say when the war started, but my motivation to say anything was very low. Because I was so disappointed and shocked and thinking that now everything went wrong and nothing worked, and all this was my first reaction. But peace work continues, and there the more there is violence, the more difficult it is, even to use the nonviolent methods. That's what, for example, Michael Nagler have said that, and I can see it here also when you think about the international law system. So this was a step back, unfortunately. But we have to see the big picture and look at this from 100 years perspective at least. And I want to remember the Paris Peace Agreement about 100 years ago, where nations of the world agreed that war is illegal. After World War II, the amount of wars have declined. The experts of international law have said that these peace agreements from Paris was a very important step on that direction. And what I want to say, something positive, is that the world's reaction to this war was very strong, and this is unacceptable. And that is a sign that, and it's unusual. This is very, very unusual situation, luckily. And I really hope we can continue the work of international system.
I wanted to take a moment to see if Laura or Anthony or Laura Childers or Kat or Tor has a question or has something to share.
And I start each of these classes by saying I'm going to share 6 names with you, and this is in the US. And if you can tell me who they are, you can leave, and I'll give you an A, which is the highest mark for the course. And I said the sad thing is, in over 20 years, I've never been able to get past the second name, let alone give away the A. And I just show the Nobel Women's Peace Initiative and peace laureates: Mairead Maguire, Shireen Abadi, Jody Williams, who's a social worker, others who we've never heard of. We say we're committed to peace and justice, and yet we've never heard of these folks. Who else have we never heard of? Why? What are we going to do about it? And this film is an effort to do something about it, and that's to share stories of people who are creatively confronting, planting seeds in the mud of war, as Thich Nhat Hanh and Dr. King would say, and Alfred Hessler, and so many others. And so I'm reminded too of the story in the film of the MLK and the Montgomery Story comic, which was also Alfred's idea as a creative way to confront violence by sharing the story of the civil rights movement here in the US, so that it would reach many more people. John Lewis, one of our heroes here, picked up that comic as a boy in the South, and it was that comic that introduced him to the story of Dr. King. And then he wrote to Dr. King, and the rest is literally history. He became the leader of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and goes on to run for Congress and again challenge congressional political leaders to do more for justice and for peace. And so that, as you saw in the film, was translated into many languages and used in Arab Spring to help spread some of that information in a way that maybe is creative. And in addition to all these other stories, is a way to get a story out there to a larger audience, a younger audience, a broader audience. And so continuing to think with all of you about how we can use this film, and beyond this film, how we can be creative in our confrontation of violence. So there are just many stories of people doing this kind of work that I think it's so critical for us to continue to share.
I would love to go back to the issue of Ukraine and what's a nonviolent, what nonviolent actions can we be taking now to end this absolute horror? I was a child and a teenager during the Vietnam War, and actually fully expected to be drafted myself because the Equal Rights Amendment was expected to pass, which would have drafted women as well. And so I spent my middle school years asking questions about it, and why would I go fight? And nobody could give me a reason, even my military relatives. I don't know if people outside the United States can comprehend how that war was such a horror for our country, which is, still minor compared to what the Vietnamese were experiencing. And then I see this, what looks to me like just a clear injustice, which is too small a word, the invasion of Ukraine and the mass murders happening there, which is, normal for war, I suppose. But you know, for the first time in my 65 years, I'm kind of thinking maybe weapons are necessary. And this is just showing a lack of imagination on my part. But I would love to hear, you know, fill in my imagination, please. What can we be doing? I know that, you know, we lived under a megalomaniac president for 4 years. And luckily, his one good quality is he has an aversion to war. But Putin apparently does not. And so how do we change his mind? My understanding is powerful people that formally supported it. Now the sixth one has fallen out of a window. You know, that of course would be one of the best ways is to already be Russian and already be powerful and oppose it. But what can the rest of us do? And I'm just here to listen. Really appreciate your ideas, especially those of you that are so close to what would happen if Putin were to just become incensed and feel like he had to prove himself. That's a very frightening reality too. Thank you.
I'm thinking back to I think it was the first Timo who referenced Thai's saying how difficult it had been to stand between parties and to refuse to take sides in the context of the Vietnam War, which was the positions of the Vietnamese Buddhists. And I'm thinking also of that campaign I referenced where I had to go and collect signatures in Vietnam. It was called Stop the Killing. And there were two sort of threads at that time within the resistance in the US and in Europe to the Vietnam War. And the one thread was stop the killing now and negotiate and take the struggle to the political realm. And the other was, no, that we have good guys and bad guys in this war, and the bad guys, that was the US, have to withdraw all their troops first as a precondition to any kind of negotiation or to stopping the war. And many peace people were on that side as well. And to me, one of the real lessons of this was that in any war, that all war is, for one thing, complicated, that all wars have long histories. And I think that history is not being talked about right now, about the current war that's going on.
Yes.
And that there are multiple interests involved in these wars, and that the first victim of war is truth. And I think you see that very much in the way in which the narrative is now being dominated, as if there's one side that's evil and the other side that's good. I think that for many people that the narrative says that this history started on February 24th, whereas there's a long history going back, and there's going back maybe 40 years, even to the agreement between Washington and Moscow that NATO would not expand to the east, NATO having done so anyway. I think there is the larger global perspective, and I'm not sure who it was who, I think it was Anthony was talking about the interconnection of global events. And I think what we're also seeing is a shift from a unipolar world that is with one major power, the US, which has been the case since the fall of the Soviet Union, to a multipolar world. And I think that the situation in Ukraine is a manifestation of the struggle between that multipolar world trying to emerge and the United States and NATO, which are trying to prevent it from emerging. So I think there's a huge global struggle going on. I think there are many levels. There are historical levels. There was a shift of government supported by the United States in 2014. Some call it a coup, which and there's been a war going on in eastern Ukraine for 8 years, where something like 14,000 civilians have already died. I mean, this is a very complicated issue, and there are huge interests. Somebody referenced, I think it was Matleena, who talked about the ways in which the military interests, mostly US military, are gaining from this war. And to me also, and to come back to that first thought about how difficult it is to stand in the middle, is that the ways in which people, and Timo also referenced this, are being, if you raise any questions about this, or if you try to look at it in a larger context than just an unprovoked attack, because this is a complicated history, that you're immediately crossed off the list or sometimes censored, labeled as a Putinist or a supporter of Putin. And I think that we do ourselves injustice if we allow that narrative to control what we think and what we say. And I think that the peace movement all across the world has a real responsibility to look at that history, to understand it, to try to listen to different voices, and to understand that there are larger things at work here than simply what is absolutely an unexcusable invasion, but that is in the context of a much bigger story. And I think we need to tell that story and to refuse to be shut up about its complications. And at the same time, to hold that space where we're open to voices for peace from whatever side they're coming, and where we're trying to understand what's really going on, what are the real complicated interests involved here, and why are voices being muffled that are trying to raise these questions. Those are my thoughts.
I was also reminded of working with IFOR in Austria for over 10 years with Hildegard Gossmeier and Marie Corrigan Maguire, who Anthony also mentioned, Adolfo Perez Esquivel, two Nobel Peace Prize winners, who had to deal also with some serious conflicts. And of course, Thich Nhat Hanh and Sister Chen Kong, who, as many of you have touched on, talked about the need to not choose sides and how difficult not choosing sides, what kind of, how difficult that path is and what kind of problems, how you can be attacked from both sides or all sides. And as, Laura has poignantly discussed, working with IFOR, that war is extremely complicated. The history of what led up to this horrible invasion of by Russia has a very long history, and it's something that even for persons who love history and political history or are interested in it, as Laura said, it's been going back like 40 years. It even continued to be, this problem that was always going to happen if we did not do something about it, was, like many things, pushed under the rug, ignored, and the writing was actually on the wall. And Putin actually said exactly what he was going to do. This is something that he talked about and it has been discussed over many years. So on one hand, I was not surprised. Many people in diplomatic circles said this is exactly what will happen if we don't deal with this issue nonviolently. So it's really important for people that are involved in nonviolence and mindfulness to have discussions with people on various sides, instead of just having discussions with people on our particular side, because as we've seen, that's not really going to change. It's not going to affect or impact much change. And also IFOR's work, we're talking about nuclear disarmament, IFOR and I believe FOR, but I know definitely IFOR International, and particularly IFOR in Germany and in Austria have been working against nuclear armament, and also participated in one of the biggest actions in Europe, in Austria, that shut down a nuclear reactor that was going to be built. In fact, was almost completed in Austria many years ago. And many civil society groups from various countries in Europe came together because they thought it was not the right, it was the right thing for Austria to do. So, thank you.
One of the two things comes to my mind right now is to support Russian opposition and the Russian conscientious objectors. I have met some Russian peace activists and I have asked them, do they want our attention and cooperation? Because I'm also afraid that if we are very active, they are suffering from that. And their answer was, yes, they want our contacts. They very much want that. It's very important for them. And one very sad thing was that they had, when they visited Finland, they had interpreter with them. And never thought about this, but it makes international cooperation extremely difficult since many of them didn't speak English, and just imagine them trying to find out information about the current situation if their only language is Russia. Second thing is developing international system. I agree with Laura Hasler there that we need to talk about history, and I really hope people would know more about what led to this. The Western powers in the 90s, the NATO countries promised that NATO is not going to expand to East, and that was broken, that promise. But at the same token, I also want to remind another agreement during the same time, 1994 in Budapest. Not only Ukraine, but also Kazakhstan and Belarus gave out their nuclear weapons to Russia in exchange to promises that Russia will respect their borders and independence. And the United States and United Kingdom also signed this, and it is very sad from this perspective from today to look at this and see how nobody is remembering this agreement. Like, what is this? Why we have international agreements, and when you break them, nothing happens. What can international community then do when a country breaks the rules? Boycotts, we are doing now lots of boycotts. We don't know yet how they are going to work. We do know that boycotts, for example, United States boycotts against Cuba and North Korea has not worked during the 50 years or so they have been done, and many other examples where the boycotts have not worked. It's easy to say examples where the war has not worked and where the boycotts have not worked, and of course the third option, very, very bad option also, not to do anything. Those three options are all very bad, and we should talk what are the options. To finish, I want to say what Albert Einstein's solution for this was. When he saw that we have nuclear weapons in the world, he saw that now we need the world government to have these nuclear weapons. That's the only solution, and it is scary thought, because that would be too much power in one place. But at the same time, it seems to be part of the problem of international law system that it was an extremely important step that now war is forbidden. But the question is, we should have more methods, like what to do when the law is broken. It doesn't matter it was Russia 2022 or Russia 2014 or United States 2003 attacking Iraq. Same thing. International systems should have tools that almost automatically go into effect. I believe strongly that war exists because they are getting something useful out of it. The role of international system, society, the law should be to make it so that it is not profitable for anybody to start war.
About what comes from the different kind of a worldview, like the division between East and West border between the Western countries and the East, like Russia. That is one big issue. Of course, that is not easily done. It's like right now, you can't, like cultural changes takes decades. But that's the one thing that should be also what we should learn about this, why the movie and the mindfulness and the teaching of Thich Nhat Hanh is so relevant at the moment. So how can we change our worldview in the way that we see each other as brothers and sisters? One difficult question is about how can we sanction Russia, and the sanctions of Russia will affect the citizens of Russia, and that is making also division, blaming for Russian citizens for Putin's work. The one thing that we don't want to do, I have try to understand also Putin somehow. I think like what he fears the most is the division in the Russia. Like how can we support the Russian people and understand the different sides of this conflict and try not to blame people. Timo also said, like, you don't oppose the people, you only oppose the violence and the act. You don't oppose the people. So that's my ending.
To take like a minute or two and just share your kind of closing thoughts on either the movie or the discussion.
Hi, everyone. I just want to thank all of you. I mean, mostly we're here to learn, to listen and to learn. And it's been a pleasure to work on this film in particular and to touch on the whole notion of inner being. It kind of came out of like nowhere. So Tor saw this project on Facebook. I think it was Facebook.
It was Twitter.
Yeah,
same thing.
And said, we don't have any money to offer to the project, but we own the post-production and we'd like to do the music and the sound for you. So they took us up on that. And through the course of watching the film and getting to know them online, we found out that we inter-are. My parents were in the Peace Corps, and my father started the Peace Corps camps at Deer Park. My family actually lived there in a trailer. I just found this out for quite a while as they were building. There was nothing there, and they were building walkways when it got muddy. And the reason that came to mind was in one of our meetings, they were talking about how Thich Nhat Hanh built a monastery there, and that the nuns go out every morning and give gratitude to the peace workers that were there before. And when they said that, I was like, oh my gosh, that my family lived there. We were there building that. So that just like the inner being and the connections of generations really struck me. And as we were making this film, my father passed away, and it just, my brother was here to watch this film, and you could see the tears in his eyes. And so I'm doing it too, but I'm just very grateful to be a part of this project and for all the work that you do. Thank you.
Another thing that came out of this movie is that I found out that my uncle Art was very heavily involved in the conscientious objector movement. He was an Episcopalian minister in Maine, and he was always one to Furman ahead, as was my father. They're very similar ages. Where it's, got married right on time for that deferment, and had kids just right on time for that one. Before that we're in college and things like that. But he helped a lot of people apply for conscientious objector status and get it in the Vietnam era. And that was a great gift that came out of working on this project, was having a chance to talk to him about what he knew about that movement and what he knew about Alfred Hassler and the interbeing of the peace movement. And another thing I'd just love to add is that, as you may guess from my first name, there is some Scandinavian heritage, and I'm just awed by your attitudes in Finland, that knowing about the tumultuous history between Scandinavia and Russia, it's amazing to me that you can find the center of this. I have to admit, I've struggled very much to find that center. And I am relatively dispassionate about that. It's far away from my personal life. And so I'm inspired, and I thank you all for being here to share that with me.
So what can we as individuals or collectives do in this situation? I think it's also very important to help the refugees and think about the future, think about the people who are affected by the war. From Vietnam War, I have heard that even more people had been killed after the war in domestic violence by traumatized Vietnam War veterans than were killed in the initial war. So the help for traumatized people is very important in the future. Putin wants to, get back Russia's or Soviets power that used to be over Ukraine. This is being done by propaganda. What we can do is to be critical, to provide more information in Russia. That's one way of helping the general public in Russia. And I would like to also recommend a book, Putin's Trolls by Jessica Aro, who is a fantastic Finnish journalist. So yeah, I would like us to stay in touch with Russian people and provide information and help, and not to blame the general public, as Timo also already noted. And what we can do as a collective, we can change the culture into more peaceful, more caretaking, more sustainable culture.
I personally am also shocked by the fact that Europe and much of the Western world have completely opened their doors to refugees from Ukraine, which I think is correct. They should. I know here in the Netherlands, people don't have to go through an asylum procedure if they're from Ukraine. They get schooling, they get put up in hotels, they get help to find jobs, they get free public transportation. And meanwhile, refugees from the wars which have been started and are still being conducted in many other places, for example, Syria, for example, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, those people are living in tents in the mud in this country, in the Netherlands. And they are being moved around from one atrocious place in a sport hall to another every 3 or 4 weeks. These are families with children. These are young men. Again, the narrative has been built for so long that we're all supposed to be afraid of people from certain regions, people with certain religious backgrounds. And I think what we're also seeing, and here again, I'm talking about seeing the interconnections, seeing the larger perspective, and being able to stand up and tell the truth about both sides. And that a journalist who exposed, for example, a lot of the war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan, Julian Assange, is sitting without being charged in a UK prison, and the US is trying to extradite him. This is also a kind of suppression of the alternate story. And everybody is talking about war crimes being committed by Russia and Putin, but nobody talks about the war crimes that have been committed by the NATO powers or the US, that this is forbidden subject matter. And I think that if we're looking at the history of people like Thich Nhat Hanh, people like Sister Chan Khong, people like my dad, people like Martin Luther King, the peace leaders that we talk about and that we want to emulate, that one of the reasons that all of these people were quite unpopular during the periods in which they were active was that they refused to go along with a single narrative. They insisted on telling the whole truth. They insisted on talking about these interconnected global powers, global forces. When Martin Luther King spoke at Riverside Church, when he spoke out against the war in Vietnam, he talked about, as Anthony said, the connections between militarism, racism, and materialism. So economic forces, social injustice. And I think we have to refuse to look at only one war. We have to refuse to look at only one set of evil. And we have to look at the systems, the history, and to speak out about that, and not to allow ourselves to be forced into a good guy, bad guy narrative about what's going on now. I'm out on the streets in my town every week to ask for the same kind of treatment for all refugees from wars and from climate change as are being extended to refugees from Ukraine. The same treatment, the same. Every human being has a right to safety. Every human being has a right to asylum. And I think we have to call out the narrative that says that only some victims are worthy victims. This is not true. And this is a story that I think is it means that we have to understand the complications of the reality that we're living in. And I think the other thing that I just wanted to say is that all of these old stories and many others of them are stories about people who, in times when the mainstream was not listening and the mainstream did not want to accept and the mainstream vilified them. Thich Nhat Hanh was accused of being a CIA agent, and so was my father, including by people in the left, people in the peace movement. They were accused of being tools of whoever because they refused to take one side, and they insisted on the importance of stopping the killing and stopping the phenomenon of war, period. And I think we have to find ways of, in every story that we come to, of looking at the complications, understanding the complications, and being willing to speak out about them, and to treat every human being as equal. And I think we should remain having faith in those things that we are doing, because those are also things that will plant seeds, that will, even in times when the clouds seem very dark. So thanks to everyone.
Thank you so much, Laura. I can't really add too much to that other than to just say that we have been socialized into fear and to believing in the US and maybe globally to some degree, but certainly in the US, to believing that war and violence bring peace somehow. And that's how we've been socialized. And as Dr. King said, powerfully, prophetically, and all too tragically, it remains true. The US is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world, selling arms globally and participating in war and believing that war brings peace. And so the narrator of the film, Reverend Dr. Emma Jordan Simpson, our previous executive director, invited us to subvert the world order and to challenge that, and to do so by seeing in the other my sister, my brother, myself, and to, in that sense, not take sides. And this is tremendously challenging, but this is the invitation, I think, and FOR tries to do that in this moment. We are inspired by words by Valerie Kaur, K-A-U-R, highly recommend Valerie, filmmaker, activist, lawyer. And Valerie says, what if this current darkness is not only the darkness of the tomb, but also the darkness of the womb? And I love that image of what is waiting to be born, and how are we going to be a part of building beloved community in this moment? How are we going to be a part of subverting the world order in this moment? How are we going to be a part of even doing something as simple as looking to the other? And as Valerie Kaur invites us to do and there's so many ways of, this is what you were saying, and Thich Nhat Hanh invites us to do, and Alfred and Sister Chen Kong, see the other as sister, brother, self. You are a part of me I do not yet know. That's Valerie Kaur's mantra. You are a part of me I do not yet know. And if we can see all refugees that way, all people that way, it transforms how we are and what we do in the world. And so I know FOR is trying to do that work. You're all trying to do that work. And we need to come together to do that work, because certainly none of us can do it alone. And so I think the inspiring thing too about Thich Nhat Hanh, the last thing I'll say is that, and the Dalai Lama has said this too, that he said there will be no other next Dalai Lama, at least this is what I've heard, that the Sangha is the Dalai Lama, that the community is the next kind of important way in which we come together, and we're going to work for peace together, overcome fear, and try and build beloved community. So thank you again. I can't thank you all enough. It's just been a privilege to be a part of this film and a part of these conversations.
Two things I like this film succeeded very well is to tell about non-violence, because the violence gets much more attention in the world, and it's if there is a conflict and non-violent solution to that, it might be that nobody ever hears that there was even a conflict, but the more there is violence and the more brutal violence, the more attention it gets. So it is extremely important to tell about the non-violence work. About the violence, it is a tricky thing to describe that. There was a scene in the movie when Sister Chan Kong was telling about this mother and the baby in Vietnam. It was a terrible scene and terrible story, how the baby was wounded. and Sister Chan Kong couldn't do anything, reminded me that that is the reality of war. Like there are babies dying in their mother's lap, and brothers and sisters and fathers and sons and daughters are dying. On the other hand, it's very important to tell about the reality of war. If I heard correct in the movie, there was this sentence: mindfulness is the capacity to recognize things as they are. I connected it to this one, that we need to we need to wake up and see reality and reality of war. It is not music and handsome soldiers and uniforms and adventure as it is represented many times, but it is stories like Sister Chan Kong told. Thank you.
It was really a pleasure to work with this project. We need to develop these 5 powers to really change the world situation, and thank you to all.
I'm so grateful for this film, and I guess my statement is more of a question: how do we get this out in the world, and so that it can be more widely seen and be influential in a bigger way?
We have, with our, extremely limited to no budget, we have done the best we can. And we'll continue to share the film, also the comic books, which have, some of the different languages have just been finished. If you have suggestions or want to help, I am, and we are open.
And I'll just say that FOR and we know Thich Nhat Hanh's community are doing all they can to help share the comics and the film as well. And so we're going to continue to work together, but certainly would welcome ideas, possible screenings, ways we might share the film or comic with educators, community groups, faith groups, activists, etc., in whatever way you think would be helpful. Thank you.
Everyone talking about refugees, about weapons, climate change. It reminded me of something that was discussed for many years within I4 Austria. There's the interconnection between weapons, between refugees, between environmental destruction in different countries. And while we have even Austria, which has became neutral after World War II, and has one reputation in terms of business and industry and all of these things, the Netherlands, Finland, Sweden, the UK, who have been profiting from weapons sales. I mean, most of the citizenry from many European countries have no idea how much money is being made off of weapons sales from, say, the Netherlands, from Finland, from Sweden, from these, because I was shocked when working for I4. I was like, okay, so I thought it was only the USA that was the major purveyor of weapons sales in the world, but that's not the case. So, and Germany also included. Yeah, it's not something that's, we think about a lot of these countries as, from many different perspectives. But when I thought about Austria or Germany or Finland or Sweden, I never thought about weapons sales. And how much profit is made and goes into the economy from selling weapons to places where they do not want refugees to come from, generally. So we sell a lot of weapons to fund different sides of war. We want the free movement of capital inside and outside of these war-torn countries. We want to profit greatly monetarily from the conflicts that we fuel on all sides. But yet when the people who are fleeing horrible situations that a lot of our countries had a lot to do with over the course of history, when those people want to come to a better place, then depending on generally what, the color of their skin or gender, religion, the factors that Christians like myself, people who were baptized Christian and are taught to, to love our neighbors as ourselves, reminds me that there's great hypocrisy within our spiritual traditions, within our political systems, within our average citizenry. And we need to, as everyone has said, have conversations about this kind of full history from the various different perspectives to make sure that we're doing our best to include different voices, to listen to different voices, and to have discussions with different sides before we decide to pick up weapons and go to war. Thank you. Yeah, it's been a pleasure connecting with the Finland group. Yeah, and getting to know all of you. There are times when I lose hope working on this stuff. I mean, many times. And I think that's something that people who work in the peace movement, the nonviolent movement, yeah, there's a lot of challenges that come with working in these areas. And then as a six-cultured brother, yeah, someone who's Native American, African, French, Mexican, Irish, that's me. Yeah, there's also these conflicts that I have with a lot of things that how persons of color, you know, are addressed and dealt with in several societies, as you know, as well as, of course, mine. Working with and getting to know people from different countries who are working towards nonviolence, working to help other people in other countries gives me hope. And so I thank you all for recharging some more of my hope batteries.
And thank you, Greg. Can't thank you enough for your tireless commitment and work and this labor of love that you've spent so many years creating. And without your leadership, it wouldn't be what it is, wouldn't have happened. So thank you. It's a privilege and an honor, my brother.